Magnus Carlsen, the world's best chess player, is known for his exceptional skills and numerous victories. However, there have been rare instances where unexpected opponents have defeated him quickly, showcasing the unpredictable nature of the game. Even great players like Magnus can face challenges and losses in certain situations. Magnus vs Alexander. Magnus Carlsen moves his piece to c4 to start a game against the powerful and second-ranked Alexander Morozovich. Alexander then moves his pawn to e6. When Magnus's c4 pawn is captured by Alexander, he quickly advances his bishop to g2 and then castles his king for defense. Alexander's components are not entirely formed, but Magnus's development is complete. Despite this, Alexander plays a pawn on b5, protecting his weaker c4 pawn to smartly maintain his additional pawn advantage. Magnus, using the white pieces in an important game, skillfully moves his pawn to a4 to attack black's center pawns. After several pawn exchanges, both sides place their bishops on the same diagonal. Alexander now has a little edge over the situation. The game, however, changes as Magnus becomes more focused and begins to make strong movements over the following few turns to strengthen his position and tip the balance on his side. By exchanging his rook for a knight, Magnus begins an assault on Alexander's king. Following that, he starts making pawn exchanges and reveals a triple attack on Alexander's f7 pawn. Alexander strikes back with his queen in defense. Magnus decides to play knight to g4 to continue his assault on the black king after carefully considering his move. Magnus makes a strong attack, but Alexander successfully repels it. Magnus gives up his knight to start piece swaps, but Alexander's strong material position wins out. To win, Alexander merely needs to exchange a few pieces. Alexander pins Magnus's bishop with smart deals. After a series of moves, Alexander threatens the checkmate and compels Magnus to abandon the game. Magnus vs Boris Savchenko. One of Magnus Carlsen's mistakes in the ensuing game against Boris Savchenko ranks among the biggest in chess history. When Magnus Carlsen plays e4 and Boris Savchenko reacts with c5, the Sicilian defense ensues in their game. Both players advance their pieces and strengthen themselves in equal positions. To move his pawn to f4, Magnus next launches an attack with his bishop to e3. Boris makes a confident counterattack, using his queen on move a5 to link his rooks. After carefully weighing his alternatives, Boris decides to move his rook to a square with more attacking potential, while Magnus moves his rook sideways. The match is still thrilling and highly competitive. Magnus launches a rapid attack during a challenging game, forcing Boris to retreat his knight. Magnus, though, commits a terrifying blunder by moving his knight to d5, throwing up a pawn on a2. By using his queen, Boris grabs the chance to take the pawn. Magnus moves his pawn nevertheless, perhaps with a strategy in mind. Then, Boris makes a mistake by playing the knight on move f6, allowing Magnus to play the knight on move c3, and preparing for his pawn to advance to b5 on the following move. The game takes an unexpected turn as both players engage in a thrilling chess match. When Boris makes a mistake and loses a knight, Magnus takes over. Magnus proposes to trade a queen, which Boris should reject because of the difficult endgame he faces. They then exchange pieces. Magnus obtains an edge in the endgame as the game goes on. Magnus appears secure, while Boris makes some blunders. However, Boris makes a clever move, exchanging his rook for a pawn, potentially paving the way for a queen promotion. Magnus surrenders his rook to stop Boris from capturing the pawn to avoid this danger. The game continues to be intense as both players plot their strategies to win. When the game reaches an equal position, Magnus makes a trade offer that Boris rejects and attacks Magnus's knight with. As time runs out, stress increases. Magnus checks Boris's king, preventing him from winning Magnus's bishop and forcing a rook swap. Magnus stops Boris's attempt to raise his piece to the rank of queen, and Boris uses his bishop to protect his pawn. Magnus wins a pawn in a fiercely fought match, but the bishops and rooks are exchanged. Boris has a bishop and 4 pawns, including a strong passed pawn, compared to Magnus's rook and 2 pawns. Unless one of them makes a mistake, the game will probably end in a tie. To protect his pawn, Magnus advances his king to the 3rd square, d3, but it turns out to be his biggest error. In response, Magnus moves his king to d4, a blunder, allowing Boris to check the king and win a rook. Magnus tries to correct the move, but it's illegal, leading to his defeat. Magnus versus Judith Polgar. The outcome of the 3rd match, a friendly game versus Judith Polgar, turned out to be even more devastating. In this game of chess, Magnus Carlsen, who was playing as black, increased the time restriction to 3 minutes to beat his opponent Judith Polgar. While Judith began with e4, Magnus chose the Sicilian defense with c5. To capture Judith's piece on g4 and advance the game, Magnus sacrificed his knight, which was a smart move that gave his opponent a difficult strategy to counter. Magnus made a crucial mistake by moving his rook to c8 after Judith failed to identify the most effective plays after a few exchanges. As soon as she noticed what had happened, Judith grabbed the chance to move her bishop to b6, giving herself an important competitive edge. Magnus understands that taking the bishop would result in a checkmate on move d7. He pauses, but ultimately accepts. Unfortunately, he loses, sacrificing his queen and gives up after only 19 moves. If you're liking the video so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Magnus Carlsen. The next game featured Magnus Carlsen against an inexperienced chess player who had challenged him in a Norwegian bar. Magnus, playing as white, rapidly made the move e4, and his opponent quickly answered with the move e5. One of the most unexpected times in chess history, the unexpected encounter with a non-professional player set the stage for an unforgettable game. The game transforms into Roy Lopez opening, and as the game continues, the opponent plays e6, attacking Magnus's bishop. Early on in the game, every action went off perfectly. Knight g6 made the first error by allowing Magnus to use knight c3 to dominate the center. Their body language indicated Magnus's confidence and the opponent's cautiousness, which affected the result of the match. Magnus was preparing for an attack with bishop c2, applying pressure to his opponent's knight, and had a little edge due to his strategically positioned pawns. Magnus made his opponent's situation challenging with his aggressive play. Magnus's strong attack on the king's side threatens to trap his opponent's bishop. Realizing the impending danger, his opponent tries to defend, but ultimately surrenders the bishop when faced with the inevitable loss of a piece. Magnus continues to press on, though some moves could have been more advantageous. Magnus's opponent in the game threatens to mate him on h2. Magnus plays queen h5, which does not pose a danger to the mate, while defending bishop f4. Magnus realizes his mistake and grabs the g7 pawn, which is problematic for his opponent. With his knight f5, he makes an enormous mistake that allows his opponent to capture the queen while winning a free pawn. In an act of nervousness, Magnus makes an attempt to capture the knight, but makes a disastrous error and unintentionally loses his queen. Magnus Carlsen's fast movements and self-assurance during this game may have caused him to quickly capture a piece, which ultimately resulted in a disastrous mistake. Magnus, despite being the world champion, realizes the seriousness of his error and resigns right away, clearly disappointed with the result. Even the finest players may make mistakes, since losing is an inherent element of the game. Magnus is still the undisputed world champion due to his fortitude and outstanding chess abilities. What do you think of these blunders? Let us know in the comment section below and make sure to like the video. Thanks for watching.